Hello and welcome. Now, the story of the crucifixion, it's one of the most familiar stories in all of history, right? But what if we've been looking at it through the wrong lens this whole time? Today, we're going to dive into a completely different way of seeing that story, not as the ultimate defeat, but as the moment that kicked off a brand new world.
So let's just start with the one question that turns everything on its head. Was the cross the tragic final end of a failed movement? Or was it the most incredible victory you could possibly imagine? To even begin to answer that, we have to understand the world that Jesus was up against.
You see, to really get the cross, we first have to get the world it happened in. And it was a world with, let's just say, very different rules about power. This whole drama didn't just unfold on some empty stage. It was a head-on challenge to the powers that were running the show in the first century.
Okay, so this is a really big one. A fundamental difference between their world and ours. Today, we at least try to keep religion and politics in separate boxes. But back in the first century, that idea would have been completely bizarre. For them, religion and politics were totally woven together, part of the same fabric of society. And this is the key consequence of that. If your religion and your politics are one and the same, then calling people to a new religious loyalty isn't just some private spiritual thing, it's a political act. Pledging your allegiance to a new god was a direct threat to Caesar's ultimate authority.
So, and this is crucial, Jesus' message wasn't just anti-Rome. His call for a totally different kind of kingdom also pulled the rug out from under the Jewish nationalist rebels who wanted to fight Rome. He was basically subverting all the existing power structures, telling both the oppressors and the revolutionaries, hey, your allegiances are in the wrong place. He was offering something brand new.
Now, you can't go around making that kind of challenge and expect nobody to notice. It actually caused some powerful and very different groups to come together and form a very unlikely and very unholy alliance against him. Now think about this for a second. Jesus wasn't put to death by some second-rate government or a fringe cult. Nope, he was condemned by the absolute best humanity had to offer at the time, the very peak of political organization, which was Rome, and the very peak of religious devotion, which was official Judaism. That tells you something really profound, doesn't it?
But the story suggests that behind these earthly powers, there's a much more sinister spiritual force at play. This is what Satan offers Jesus out in the wilderness: total control over all the world's kingdoms. It's a claim that these systems, when they demand our ultimate loyalty, are really operating under his authority.
And here's the direct link. Satan offered Jesus all that worldly power if he would just bow down and worship him. Jesus said no. And so, the cross is the direct consequence of that refusal. The kingdoms of the world, acting as a kind of proxy for this dark power, reject and kill the one person who absolutely refused to play their game.
So this brings us to the climax. From every possible human perspective, this was the moment. This was when the powers of the world, and the darkness behind them, scored their total and complete victory.
At the cross, you see all these forces: Roman politics, Jewish religious authority, and that spiritual power of darkness. They all converge on one single point. And their goal is simple: eliminate the one person who dared to challenge their authority for good.
Jesus himself names this moment in the garden. He's not just talking about the soldiers who came to arrest him. He's acknowledging that this is the hour where the spiritual darkness that props up all the world's power systems gets to do its absolute worst. It looks like a complete surrender.
And the way they do it, it's the ultimate expression of worldly power. They strip him, they shame him, they hold him up to be publicly mocked and ridiculed. They are celebrating their victory, proving to everyone watching that this is what happens when you dare to challenge the rulers of this world. It really, truly looks like the end.
But right at that precise moment, their greatest triumph, the entire story pulls off a great reversal. The whole narrative is about to get turned completely inside out.
This is the critical question. What if, in doing their absolute worst, the powers of the world actually set the stage for their own downfall? What if they overplayed their hand? What if this was all part of a much bigger, much more cunning plan?
This is the secret, right here. You could call it the cunning of God's love. The strategy was to draw all the world's evil, all its hatred, its rejection, its violence, and focus it all onto one single point: to absorb it all. Not to be destroyed by it, but to actually disarm it from the inside.
And St. Paul just lays out how it works so beautifully.
He explains that the lists of charges against all of us, the very thing that gave Satan power over us, was symbolically nailed to the cross. The very weapon of execution became the receipt for our freedom. Incredible.
So let's bring this all home. What does this victory on the cross really mean? Because it's not just some nice spiritual idea. It has massive, world-changing implications.
Here's the most crucial point. Jesus was the one person who had never actually given in to the power of the world's rulers. He was already free from them. And because of that, he could take their absolute worst punishment, and instead of being defeated by it, he could expose it for what it was and beat them at their own game. And this is that great reversal in action. The world's big plan was to strip Jesus naked and hold him up for public shame. But in this stunning act of what you might call divine judo, God used that exact moment to strip the rulers of the world and make a public example of them, celebrating his own triumph over them on that very cross.
So you see, the cross isn't a defeat at all. It's this dramatic, public reassertion of God's sovereign love. It declares that the world's power structures, they don't get the final say. It announces that a new kingdom has arrived, and that the kingdoms of this world now belong to a new and better authority.
And all of that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. If the cross really is the defeat of power as the world knows it, power based on violence and shame and domination, what does that mean for how we live, for how we lead, and for how we engage with the power structures of our own world today?